Well, this has been quite a week for New Zealand's increasingly pathetic-looking Prime Minister. The one who, a few months ago, had no idea what a woman was, is now also going around the world for his absolute gaslighting of the thousands and thousands of New Zealanders who suffered under the brutal regime of Jacinda Ardern, with Chris Hipkins absolutely panting at her elbow to endorse and enforce on her behalf. Look at this cartoon. He's even being put down there with the levels of lies of a Clinton and the UK Prime Minister, of course, denying there was ever a party at number 10 Downing Street. And here's our New Zealand Prime Minister, laughingstock around the world. Many of you will have seen what he said, and many of you will have seen the reactions to it. Here it is as a reminder. And look at the two behind, particularly Sepuloni. Look at her face as she watches her Prime Minister blatantly lying to the people of New Zealand.
See any kind of value in looking into potential compensation for anyone, disadvantaged through COVID, whether they were mandated out of their jobs or injured by the vaccination program?
There's a process for people who are injured in a medical procedure. There's already processes in place for dealing with that. In terms of the vaccine mandates, I acknowledge that it was a challenging time for people, but they ultimately made their own choices. There was no compulsory vaccination. People made their own choices.
Is any of that going to be included in the inquiry that's going on at the moment around COVID? Is it going to look at any of those issues?
The Royal Commission can look at whatever it wants in regard to the COVID response.
So it could potentially look at how many fit been injured, how many were mandated out, and potential compensation for them. That could be looked at.
Well, ultimately, it's a Royal Commission, so it's not my job to direct them. Other than they have a terms of reference which everybody can see, and it's certainly not my job to instruct them what they do within that terms of reference.
In terms of reference, they're not going to assess individual claims, so they wouldn't be looking at certain people.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
There are many angles on this. I think Mike Hosking has done a very short, sharp cross-examination that reveals a man willing to double down on his buffoonery, even as the world gasps in horror and also ridicules Hipkins.
Just quickly, the comment you made yesterday on the vaccine and the mandate, do you regret that?
Sorry, which comments are you talking about?
Sorry, my apologies. On Sunday, you made the comment about the vaccine mandate. Ultimately, it was not mandated. Vaccines were not mandated. Do you stand by that? There was no compulsory vaccination.
That is not the word that I used. I said nobody was forced to be vaccinated.
There was no compulsory vaccination. People made their own choices, quote unquote.
There was no compulsory vaccination. People made their own choices.
That is correct, Mike. There were some people needed to be vaccinated to do some jobs, but no one was made to be vaccinated.
So you would stand. All I'm asking for the record, you would stand by. So the person, for example, who made the choice not to get vaccinated, lost their business and laid people off. That's on them, not you.
Well, they made a choice.
Appreciate your time very much.
This piece by Coronavirus Plushie, one of our best editors in the honesty space, I call it, the freedom space, the truth-telling space in New Zealand media. This piece is revelatory as well.
In terms of the vaccine mandates, I acknowledge that it was a challenging time for people, but they ultimately made their own choices. There was no compulsory vaccination. People made their own choices.
The government is planning to require every single teacher at every level and all support staff who work with children to be vaccinated.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
Newshub can reveal the mandate Chris Hipkins is taking to Cabinet on Monday is a mighty big stick. Every educator who works with a child will have to be vaccinated.
People made their own choices.
I can now confirm that we'll be extending this requirement to large parts of our health and education workforces as well.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
Cabinet's agreed that high-risk workers in the health and disability sector will need to be fully vaccinated by the 1st of December.
People made their own choices.
This includes general practitioners, pharmacists, community health nurses, midwives, paramedics, and all healthcare workers in sites where vulnerable patients are treated, including intensive care units.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
We'll also be including certain non-regulated healthcare workforces, including aged residential care, home and community support services, kaupapa Māori health providers, and non-government organisations that provide health services.
People made their own choices.
Schools and early learning staff and the support people who work with them, who have contact with children and students, will need to be fully vaccinated by the 1st of January 2022.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
That includes home-based educators, all those who support people in our schools and early learning services such as teacher aides, administration and maintenance staff, and contractors.
People made their own choices.
Secondary schools in Kura will also be required to keep a COVID-19 vaccination register of their students.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
Students that don't produce evidence of vaccination will be considered unvaccinated.
People made their own choices.
What will the ramifications be for teachers or those in the health workforce who choose not to be vaccinated?
Ultimately, in the health workforce, they will not be able to work in those roles.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
In the education workforce, from next year, they won't be able to work in those roles.
People made their own choices.
So my message to New Zealanders who have not yet had their first dose: if you want summer, if you want to go to bars and restaurants, get vaccinated. If you want to get a haircut, get vaccinated. If you want to go to a concert or a festival, get vaccinated. If you want to go to a gym or a sports event, get vaccinated.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
If you are not vaccinated, there will be everyday things you will miss out on.
People made their own choices.
Everyone will be able to get a vaccine between now and the end of the year. But of course, and I want every New Zealander to come forward, but human behaviour suggests that there will be some people that we have to actually really go out and look for.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
But I can't say that, that we're not going to have some hesitant people or some people who just haven't come forward that we don't have to go out and find next year.
People made their own choices.
Cabinet has decided today that vaccinations will be mandated for everyone who works in any workplace where a vaccine certificate is required for entry.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
This includes hospitality, events, gyms, and close proximity businesses such as hairdressers and barbers.
People made their own choices.
Once the notice period commences, the employee will have that amount of time to get vaccinated.
There was no compulsory vaccination.
The employee will be able to retain their employment if they get vaccinated in that period, but their employment will be terminated if they do not.
A mighty big stick.
People made their own choices.
And finally, I want to cut to a tweet from Kiwi for Justice. I think this sums it up very well for many of us. Let's be quite clear here, says the tweet. The Nuremberg Code of 1947 and the New Zealand Bill of Rights both state that coercion by a government to take a medical procedure is a crime. All 120 current MPs from every current political party knowingly supported that crime and refused to even speak with the non-compliers. That is a very well put piece. Remember all those desperate mum and dad Kiwis, middle New Zealand, who were never ever a river of filth, who went to the grounds of Parliament to beg for some mercy. And all of those letters from that dreadful Ashley Bloomfield, declining any kind of compassion or humanity or human dignity, turning down every desperate application for an exemption from the jab so that people could keep their jobs and their livelihoods. And now this pathetic little Labour Prime Minister openly gaslights the people of New Zealand. New Zealand, I've said it before and I ask you again, look with both eyes open at the brutality of what they have done, at the continued lies, at the absolute mediocrity and, yes, criminal behaviour of this government. My thesis to New Zealand is that Labour is at an end. After the 2023 election, they should never, ever again be allowed back in Parliament. And within that, I include the Greens. And frankly, I include National as well. Where did Christopher Luxon ever act as a proper opposition leader and oppose anything? No, he went along with all of it because he, like Ardern, goes along with the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization edicts, and worst of all perhaps, the United Nations, wherein they are trying to coerce and bully in the coming years the people of New Zealand into horrific 15-minute cities. We must say no to all of them. We must include their David Seymour, who is absolutely a WEFer and was deeply disappointed not to go off to China for the summer ghastly WEF conference that we all shudder as we see these leaders that we have not given our permission to go race to see themselves in the big chairs at the front of the room. Any leader who goes off to a WEF conference after this election should be deemed a traitor to this country and treasonous, and be put on trial for treason to the New Zealand people's best interests. Enough of all this nonsense. Enough of the 120 in there. And enough forever of Chris Hipkins and Labour.